All right, hello and welcome everybody to yet another episode of the Dead Draw Gaming Podcast. I am your host Etchy, and joining me we have a very high skill level cast of characters here today. We have multi-time regional champion Piper Lepine joining us. Piper, how's it going?
Good. That was last season. Pretty washed this season, but it's fine.
You just got a top 64, which we'll talk about the deck you
Uh,
played for that, and also you didn't you get like top 32 at EUIC too?
yeah, but like Guardy's really bad.
All right, well, we'll talk about how bad that deck is in just a little bit. We're also joined here by Jake Gearhart. Jake, how are you doing on this wonderful Monday, almost evening?
Uh, yeah, I'm doing good. I got my invite yesterday finally, so I'm happy to be freed of locals. Yeah, I come back to Minnesota to visit parents for a couple weeks and play 3 tournaments and get first and second, and then lose to Braden in the other one. So, uh, yeah, doing pretty well.
Awesome to hear. Congratulations. Everyone in the comments, be sure to congratulate Jake on his invite. We're going to talk more about the current championship invite structure as our Patreon bonus episode after we record this episode. So if you're interested in hearing Jake's thoughts on that now that he's qualified, make sure you subscribe to the Patreon. And then also, we're joined by another multi-time regional champion and very recent, still the reigning North American regional champion, I guess, Andrew Hedrick. Andrew, how is it going?
It's going pretty well. Excited to have LA this week, kind of wrap up this format and then go into NAIC format really soon.
Yeah, super soon. We're going to be talking a lot about both LA and the NAIC format. We're going to cover a bunch of different decks, decks that people are surprised they're doing well or aren't surprised that they aren't doing well. We're going to talk about Dialga, Gardevoir, Dragapult, all that good stuff. But before we get into that, we got to talk about the recent results because it's been just 2 weeks since our last episode, but there's been a ton of events. No new North American events, or except for, there's been Puerto Rico, but there's been some regional championships across the world and 2 special events. So we'll probably start with the Stockholm Regional Championships, which happened basically right after the podcast. There, Azul won with Snorlax control, Snorlax stall, and it's kind of been doing pretty well after that. And also at that tournament, a lot of people brought it. Gabe brought it as well. Seemed to do really well there, obviously winning the event, but also just throughout day 2, it seemed to do pretty well. And it also won one of the special events. So I think that's probably a good place to start talking about control stuff in general, because a lot of people were pretty convinced for pretty decent amount of time, like the last couple of months, that Pidgeot was just better than Snorlax. And then here comes Snorlax just doing really, really well at this event. It had a couple of strong placements at a previous European regional as well. I think he got like one top 32 pretty recently, but it seems to have fully taken swing here. Why is that happening, Jake?
I mean, I think right now the results are pretty even between Snorlax and Pidgeot control. Like at Indianapolis, like Grant Manley got top 8, and then Tord at Stockholm got top 4, which is it kind of mostly a Pidgeot control deck. There was a Charizard in there, but it's a Pidgeot control deck. And then yeah, Azul brings Snorlax and wins with it. I think Snorlax overall has like more polarizing matchup spread. And so it's like if you hit the good matchups, you're going to do really well, and if you're a good player, you're going to sometimes beat the bad matchups too, because most people do not know how to play against these types of decks in general. Um, so I think the results are pretty up in the air. I think Andrew winning with Dialga maybe put like a little more people onto Snorlax, at least Azul. I think that's what he mentioned in one of the interviews, that he wanted to make sure he had a good Dialga matchup, even though nobody played it for that tournament for whatever reason. I think it was just too close, like a 1 week
Yeah,
turnover.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think both the decks are doing well, because the best 2 decks in the format, Charizard and Chen Pao, have like solidified themselves as above the rest in terms of play rate and like top players playing them. And both control variants are good against those matchups. So yeah, it's a solid play right now. I think we'll end up seeing more Spiritomb come into decks soon for LA, or at least it should come into decks, because yeah, Control has a hard time setting up against that, and Snorlax just can't beat it in general. The Pidgeot, as long as you can get the Pidgeot in play, it's all right, but getting that is pretty tricky without Rotom.
Yeah, obviously the Snorlax one did way better at the Stockholm regionals, but we did see a lot of good players bringing it, right? The Azul group with Azul and Caleb Gedimer and Ryan Antonucci, and then Antonucci made it into top 16 in Azul 1, and Gabe also made top 32 with the deck.
Mhm.
So obviously when you see more good players switching over to a deck, maybe they thought it was good for the meta, it's going to have better results. But I definitely still do think it's a good deck, like Jake said. Having the good matchups against Charizard and Chen Pao. Blocklax definitely has the better Chen Pao matchup than Pidgeot as well. I think the Pidgeot one can get a little bit close sometimes, but Blocklax kind of just runs over that matchup. So it's definitely still a good deck. I do think people will bring it probably to LA, but some people might be a little bit scared after seeing how well it did at the last regionals that people might start putting that Spiritomb in their deck.
Yeah, we usually have that kind of control life cycle thing where it does really well at one event, and then people will like over prepare for it, over tech for it at the next event, and then not as many people bring it, so it doesn't do as well. And also because people are tech for it, the people that do bring it don't do as well. So it kind of goes up and down, and that might be what happens at LA for sure. Any other thoughts on Snorlax or Pidgeot? I know Piper, you've written a lot about control decks for Cutter Tap.
Yeah. I mean, Snorlax is just less fragile than the Pidgeot variant. Like, a lot of times, if you whiff the Pidgey turn 1 or something, or your opponent is able... Yeah, usually if you whiff it, then, like, in future turns when you bash it, your opponent's able to, like, gust kill it. So then you have to get 2, and the deck just overall feels a lot worse than it has, like, in the past for me. It's very fragile. Blocklax can just win games, especially against people that don't know what they're doing. But also one thing is, like, Grant Shen and Caleb Gettimer both also played it to Stockholm, but neither made day 2, whereas, like, Gabe, Antonucci, and Azul all did really well. But it's like, it's one of those things, it is just very polarizing matchups, and you do just lose games, like, regardless of skill level, to, like, just hitting bad matchups, people that, like, kind of know what to do against your deck.
For sure.
Yeah, one thing I like about the deck that Tord played, kind of a concept that he mentioned back with the crazy Charizard or Urshifu deck before, but like Charizard's a very good distraction. Like you're kind of forced to deal with it as soon as it comes into play. So it helps a little bit in that issue of if you can't establish Pidgeot, or even if you do establish Pidgeot, if there's just a Charizard there that you probably can't ignore it, because it's going to be getting rid of your energies in play really quickly. And so I think that makes it like a better all around deck than sort of the more heavily just like stalling variants of the Pidgeot, where like your really only attacker is Wigglytuff, which isn't that big of a threat, doesn't do that much damage very early. So yeah, that's why I like Charizard a little bit more than Wigglytuff.
I also like the Liepard version with, like, the Entei, because the Entei with a Mist Energy is very solid, especially when you have an option like Picnic Basket to heal it or Fresh Water Set. That just 230 is a very difficult number to hit for a lot of decks like Lost Box. But you also have the Liepard, which also, like, it makes your deck less fragile, so you don't need to, like, have all these pieces in your hand and then only be able to find one. Like, you get to draw your cards and then quick search to build your combos, which feels a lot better for me, at least. But yeah, I think Wigglytuff is really bad. I don't know why people keep playing that version, but
I know Blitzel listens to the podcast. I know, I know Blitzel will be sad to hear that. Because I know
it's
Nick.
just so mid.
Literally, the first thing I mentioned when I hit Blitzel in the Indie Cup was mentioning that Nick was talking trash about the deck on the podcast a few episodes ago. But yeah, interesting thoughts there. It'll be really interesting to see what happens at LA, and we'll talk potentially more about how much we should worry about control when we talk about LA regionals more in depth in just a little bit. The other deck I kind of want to talk about from Stockholm was Hermione's Lost Box list. As someone who's been playing a lot of Lost Box, I was glad to see the Luminion, especially in that list. I've been a big Luminion believer. I played it to Indy as well. It's a really strong card, especially when there's not a bunch of like Turbo Hands running around in general, even though Turbo Hands did get top 8 at Stockholm. But a lot of the things, if you're just really careful about when you play it, it's really good. The Rotom, also incredibly good for dealing with a lot of those matchups where things like Flutter Mane still lets you draw cards and potentially unbrick yourself from really bad situations. I'm a big Raikou V hater in general, and I have been since like pre-EUIC, because I just don't think it's that useful. And Rotom seems like a much better Seal Stone target in general, and just makes a lot of sense in the deck. And in general, it's just like a really clean, crisp list that I like a lot. And it's been it'll be interesting to see how much people kind of play Lost Box going forward, because it kind of seems like it has a pretty big target on its back, given Santiago having 2 Banets in top 8. And we'll talk about that later too. But any other thoughts on kind of Lost Box in general right now and Hermione's list?
I think like conceptually it's really interesting. Like this deck has kind of gone more towards just playing a 2-2-2 route kind of game, right? With the Rotom and Lumineon, you're kind of just saying you're going to be benching those 2 prizers early and trying to just more pressure your opponent instead of playing a really long game where you're using Cramorant and Sableye more. I like you with the Rotom. You get access to so many different plays turn 2. You can pull off almost everything you want to do in your deck, kind of like what Charizard does, where you use the Rotom and you can get the double candy turn 2, which isn't a super realistic play otherwise. Right, with the Lost Box, you can pretty easily get to your gate plays turn 2, even going first, right? Draw into your Lost Vacuums, your Mirage Gates, your Switch cards, everything that you need, and then have a Forest Seal Stoneholder as well. So I do really like the list, like conceptually. I do think it definitely needs a boss, especially with the Palpat, but I like the idea behind the list.
Yeah, I like Lumineon overall because another big thing with the deck is with no VIP pass, it can be hard to like set up your either EX Pokemon attackers or like your Radiant Greninja. So then you're using your Nest Balls early to find Cram or Radiant Greninja. So with the Ultra Ball for fish, like not only can it get fish inconsistency, it's also like a fifth way to search those guys, which is really nice. And just a boost to consistency late game. I'm not sold on the Rotom. It's okay. But one thing I do really like about Hermione's list is the Defiance ban, because now you can KO in Iron Hands without like using Hoopa, because that thing sucks, and you don't have to Frenzy Gouging, because that also sucks. There's also like a couple other applications, but like amping a Pidgeot, which is nice. And there's a lot of things I like about the list. Definitely needs the boss. I don't know how they got away with that for 15 rounds or whatever.
I think a lot of people have been. A lot of people have been playing this like cups and lobes and stuff, and everyone's just been cutting the counter catcher for a boss pretty much. The logic for it obviously being that Hermione kind of maybe highly valuing the Sableye Roxanne counter catcher play more than the extra Gust consistency. But with the Palpad, the boss just seems really, really strong in the list for sure.
Yeah, I still like Countercatcher. I've been playing something close to Brent Tonnison's top 8 list, just for testing for LA, and I cut one of the bosses for a Countercatcher because I like having 2 outs to item-based Gust, especially with the double Roxanne that Brent played. But yeah, I definitely I like 3 Gusts overall. Palpad is like kind of 3 Gust, but
Right.
if you have to like loss own boss, which sometimes happens, it's like then you only have the Prime Catcher, and sometimes that's not enough to close out games. But also like Countercatcher is probably better with like I do think Countercatcher is still good with the Rotom stuff as well, because if your opponent is able to aggressively target those, then it's just a free Gust early that you can chorus into, and then you can save your Prime Catcher for later, which is very good.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for sure. The next deck I just wanted to mention briefly was just Turbo Hands. Yo's been playing Turbo Hands this entire format and got another top 8 at Stockholm with it. It does seem like it's in a pretty decent position in general right now, because it does seem like it just depends if Zard numbers like decline or not, I guess, because it feels like I don't actually know what Zard numbers were at Stockholm for like day 1 meta. I don't know if those were like released or not, but it was still pretty popular in day 2. Jake, do you think people should play 4 Turbo Hands in a deck right now?
I just don't think the deck is good at all. But like it's so linear and
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm very, very surprised Yuho was able to top 8 like all of these tournaments in a row.
Yeah.
Like I'm shocked by that even. So maybe there's a little bit more skill involved than I think there is, but yeah, I don't think it's like I wouldn't play it. I like it doesn't seem like it has any like super good matchups against the decks that you want to be beating right now, which are like Charizard and like even Lost Box can still be sketchy because your Miraidon has 110 HP. If it had 120 HP, it'd be a lot better. But
Sure.
yeah, it's like every deck right now is able to keep up with it, and it's not doing anything special. Like if you're not like a very strong player and you just want to have like the best chance of day 2ing, then maybe Turo Hands is a good play. But aside from that, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're Yuho and have some magic generator abilities. I don't know.
Yeah, Yuho's like success with the deck has actually been pretty impressive. I think he has like 2 top cuts with it this format, and then he also had the LASC win with a hand. There was more of a Miraidon deck too, but it's been impressive to see how well he has done with the Iron Hands decks. And obviously it can't be that bad if he's still been able to see success with it. But I would not be playing it myself personally either. But it's not a completely horrible deck. it puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to have a fast response instead of quickly. But if they're able to, the deck falls short a lot of the time.
Yeah, the deck feels pretty mid. I will say, like, well, Yuho's a good player and like the deck, and he's seen success with the deck. It's like the two events are like the first event of the season, or of the format. So it's like a lot of people are not like prepping for specific lists, and you can kind of get like surprise factor. And then now it's like a 650-ish player event, which like it's still impressive to top 8, but it's like the field like gets a bit weirder at the smaller events, I feel. And like I don't know.
The future hands deck is just so weak to like hand disruption late game. I think if the Tatsugiri like from next set was out right now, that deck would be so much better because you just could find a boss at the end or find a research. But Dragapult's like a pretty hard matchup for it, so I don't think it'll stick around long enough to see that card.
Yeah, it seems solid going forward because it's more Miraidon, but that like is played. But yeah, the deck definitely seems good going forward.
Like you're talking for NAIC format?
Yeah,
yeah, with the Tatsugiri.
Yeah,
Miraidon's a lot stronger just because you can like do 220, which is pretty good. Like because you can do that. No, you can do the hands into the Raichu thing, which is what beats the Dragapult. If you don't have the Raichu option, the matchup against Dragapult is like pretty terrible because they can just like knock out 2 hands at once and disable your baton with the damage counters. And they have enough damage that switch cart doesn't matter there. But yeah, Miraidon being able to go hands into Raichu is pretty strong next format. But yeah, if Dragapult start playing Charizard, like even a thin line of Charizard, which I think they probably should, then that matchup is a lot worse.
Makes sense, yeah. We'll talk potentially a little bit more about turbines later. We're going to try to cover some of the niche NAIC format decks as well. But other than that, for other recent results, Goldango and Snorlax won the 2 special events. Kind of ready to talk about Snorlax. Does anyone have any thoughts on Goldango? Anything you want to mention? Is it secretly really strong for LA?
I think the only reason Goldango won is because Jose played it.
Yeah.
There's no other reason.
The day before EYC, Hunter Butler tried to convince me on Goldango. I went through a mad dash after check-in to get Goldango EXs. I got them. Then we got back, started testing it in Zard, and then went 08 into Zard and dropped the deck. Like, feels so bad.
Yeah. All right, then. The other thing to note that I wanted to mention was, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but for Santiago Regionals, Lost Box won that. It does seem like Lost Box numbers are going to continue to keep rising, especially going into LA. It's definitely a deck that you should respect very heavily. But one of the ways that people are respecting it is by playing Banette EX. 2 of the top 8 players were playing Banette EX. I believe I saw on Twitter they're both playing the same 59 of the same 60. So very similar list. It's a deck that has been like okay, like it hasn't seen like super success, but that's because a lot of people just haven't really been playing it. I know Mateus, I don't know how to pronounce their name, was playing it for like the entire last few months and seems to have been putting up still strong results with it. But now 2 top 8s in one event in a format where there's a lot of Qianpao and Lost Box dominance seems pretty good.
I think Banette's very good. I think like the week after EYC, I just started playing the deck a bunch. Then Ancient Box got like really popular for no reason, so I kind of like ditched the deck for a bit. But now it's seen success again. I think one of the big reasons it hasn't seen success is like you said, not a lot of people are playing it, but it's also like very difficult to play. Mateus has said this a lot on Twitter. Like they keep farming all the online events, but I don't think they've been able to like play in Stockholm or anything. But I know they have a couple like top 32s with Banette this season. And yeah, the deck's in a very good position. It has like you beat Zard and C-Pow pretty consistently. And you have a good Lost Box matchup because you just like you Calamitous Wasteland and just keep bringing up their comfies, and it's like very awkward for them. And you move the damage around, and you just kind of lock them out of the game a lot of times. The lines with the deck are very interesting though, and I like it a lot. So it's definitely in consideration for me for LA. I don't know if people should be prepping for it a ton though, because it's not going to be very popular.
Yeah, being a top 8 regional for a very small regional that probably a lot of people weren't watching means it, and also one that this short notice means it's probably not going to be something to really worry about. And not just saying that because Piper might play it.
I mean, it's also going to be like less than 1% of the meta.
Yeah.
Like,
to me, it seems kind of like playing Blockhawks, where you're trying to take best matchups against like the top decks in the format, and then you take a few like poorer matchups against some of the more fringe decks and kind of just hope to hit them, not to hit them. But it's definitely really impressive to see 2 people make cut with it, and one of them also, if I understood their tweet right, actually got a game loss round 1 of the tournament for, like, not showing up on time. So they started 0-1 and still were able to make it a top cut. So obviously had to be a pretty good deck. And yeah, I think it definitely needs to get looked at a little bit more, but the format's coming to a close pretty soon, so we might never really figure out exactly where it fits into the meta.
Yeah, it doesn't seem terrible next format, but Lugia might be a bit tricky. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get up Archeops under item lock, but you have like so much time, so probably
Yeah.
not that
Bro,
bad.
they can just read the win, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You have
The
Carmine
the
too.
Lugia
is
is
actually
very bad.
chilling.
Also, like, I'd imagine Dragapult's not great either, because they can, like, Evo. Because a lot of lists can just go Arven for Evo and then set up and then just airmail a bunch. And just be careful of how many items they have in there. Like, I don't, it's not as relevant because they won't Poltergeist a ton, but I don't think the item lock hurts Dragapult a ton. So, and then Lugia getting popular is not great.
For sure. We'll talk about Lugia and its new place in the meta for NAIC in just a little bit. I kind of just want to cover last few decks for LA Regionals, starting with Dialga, which we kind of brushed on a little bit. It hasn't been super popular and hasn't done super well after Indy. Like we mentioned, basically didn't show up at all in Stockholm, probably because of how close it was. I believe there were a few in day 2 of Santiago, like maybe 5 or so in there. Nothing super, super high placing. But why do you think that's happening, Andrew? Why is it not dominating all these tournaments?
Yeah, at Santiago, it actually did do a little bit better than I think it shows up at the end. There was a few that were in contention for like top 16s, top 8s for the tournament. In their last few rounds, they kind of fell short. So, but it definitely was not a horrible deck for the tournament or anything. But overall, like it's not going to get like too popular. I don't think like throughout the rest of the format. I do think it's still pretty good. But coming off the Blocklex win, that's also not quite as good for it. But even like going into those tournaments, it's just one of those things where a deck is not going to completely gain popularity when everyone kind of has already decided on their decks this format, right? It's already kind of coming to a close. People are already probably testing for NAIC a lot of times at this point and not really focusing too much more on this format. So I think there's a good chance people have just stuck with kind of what they've been testing with and probably not been trying too many new things.
I guess conversely then, is there any reason to not play Dialga for LA?
I mean, I would say I would just play what you've been testing. That's probably the best strategy for most people.
Sure.
I definitely will be considering it pretty heavily because that's the deck I've played the most with. But,
is Blocklex like the main concern for playing it right now?
I mean, that's definitely not a great matchup. No, you can win if you like get set up way faster than them, but usually, yeah, that's not a good matchup. But I don't think that deck's too popular in general anyways.
Sure.
I would just say like play what you've been testing is probably the best thing to do. And that's probably what most people have been doing.
Yeah, that's right. That is the classic PTCG advice for sure. So I guess the next thing to talk about is Gardevoir. Piper played Gardevoir to a top 32 and top 64 finish at recent events, and right before we started recording, was like, yeah, but those decks, that deck's bad. So what are your thoughts on Gardevoir for LA, Piper?
I don't know. It's like the last one, I kind of lost my sanity from playing Guardy. Like, the deck just feels so bad sometimes. Like, the TM Evo engine just sucks. Like, I don't know. I was on like severe Guardy copium from pre-rotation. Like, I played it to pretty much all locals all season in like Vancouver. And then I just had like nothing else to play for UIC. So I ran Guardy. Then I had finals all of April, so I didn't test for Indy. So then I just played it again. But like your C-POW matchups, like just not that good, and all the top players are playing C-POW. It feels at this point, so it's like I don't know if it's worth it to play Guardy. I don't know. The deck just also feels really bad sometimes. Probably a bit more than sometimes, but
Sure.
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I can say I tested Guardy a little bit because I mean that's all I played like last format, but I just was never confident in the Charizard matchup if they knew what they were doing and just like played boss every turn and had a way to get bosses back. If they're playing like a list with only like the 2 boss and like even like max belt and then like no way to recover them, then the matchup's fine. But if you're playing against someone with like Palpad or Yelchi or Prime Catcher. Like they're just so hard to deal with your Curlias dying every turn. Like you can get 2 up with a Mimikyu and then 1's gone and you're drawing like nothing every turn. And it's so hard to find them with like Ultra Ball, such like hard to discard things. Like next format, I'm a lot more happy about the way the deck is playing because of the Hyper Aroma is very, very good. But yeah, right now it's like it's not taking that good matchups, and it's also a bit inconsistent, I think.
I will say the Zard matchup's not that bad. Like, you can Eerie the Palpad because most of us are playing that. That's obviously a bit Luxacky, but you can also Eerie Candies and Rods, and then TM Diva with your Mimikyu, and then they're down like a lot of resources, and it ends up being like a really weird game. It definitely helps when your opponent hasn't tested the matchup, which a lot of people haven't, but overall, it feels like very slightly favored. Like I'd say 55-45 or 60-40, but that's just from my experience.
When I play, I always go like just evolve through Charmeleons because you have so much time. You can just put up the no like the one that can't take damage from Mimikyu, and then just set up behind that one, and then you're like not weak to Devo. And then if you can get like a Pidgeot in play and Barrel in play, then you're like really not weak to Hand Disruption or anything, and you can usually just win by bossing every turn from there. And you have like a good amount of time to set up. But yeah, if they Eerie the Palpad, then it's bad. But I've also been playing Yell's Cheer mainly, so
Yeah.
you can't Eerie that.
When they evolve up, it gets me like a lot of time, and then I'm set up like because then you're even if you evolve up, that's an extra turn. I like to go first as Guardy. I mean Zard likes to go second. So a lot of times I just get an extra card, potentially an extra refinement, concealed or whatever, to set up early consistency, and then I'm just like going through my deck, and then I'm just like hitting all the pieces and can a lot of times like go 2-2-2. I found it's definitely weird though.
I think as long as Zard gets like the first KO, then like they can match 2-2-2 with the vacuum. Like
Yeah.
it's pretty bad. If you hit the vacuum with the Eerie or with the Palpad, then you're definitely winning. But with those two, I think it's like yeah, as long as Zard doesn't dead draw at the end of the game, it's pretty fine from what I've tested. But this format's almost over. Next format, I'm happy about Guardy.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
definitely talk about that in just a little bit. But speaking of Charizard, obviously still big bad deck. It was like 24, almost 25%, I believe, at Indy. Doesn't seem like those numbers have probably changed too much at other events that have happened since then. What I mean, I don't even know like what to talk about with Charizard at this point that we haven't talked about. Just should you still play it for LA, Jake, and yes, or why?
I think it's getting kind of risky to play it because like a ton of good players are on Chen Pao. We've seen like Block Lax pop up more, and Block Lax is a deck that like you don't have to play for you don't have to have too many games into Block Lax to play it enough to where you're beating Charizard. So people could pick that up theoretically, and it's like just in general, it's I feel like it's getting sort of countered out right now by what's going in decks, and especially if people start putting in Spiritomb, like to hit the Hermione Lost Box deck and Block Lax and Pidgeot control, and you happen to hit Charizard as well with that. It's a bit dangerous. But yeah, I mean, it's the best deck in the format, so it's not ever terrible to play.
Sure.
But yeah, weak against a lot of the techs that are in decks.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of good players drop Charizard, right, and for good reason because all the different decks are becoming more popular, right? And the Chen Paos with all of the good players too. And if the Chen Pao player is good, that matchup is pretty hard for Charizard. So
Yeah.
overall, I do think that Charizard's like definitely in a worse spot than it was before, but I don't think it's gonna drop too much from its meta share and being by far the most played deck. So it's definitely still like the top deck to worry about for LA, but it's not like I don't think we're going to see it performing at the levels it was before. It has kind of dropped off recently, and I think it will probably stay around.
Yeah, I
the
got
results that it's seen.
very few top 8s in general at all these events after Indy. Yeah, only one. It was just Tord's list, which was very non-traditional Zard list at Stockholm, and then none in Santiago, 2 in Bogota, and then Puerto Rico 0. So yeah, it's like it does seem to be kind of being targeted pretty hard in general right now. Any other decks or quick things to mention for LA? Again, that is happening in a few days from now, and it is, I think, the last tournament in the format, right? There's no other regionals across the world that are happening in this format, as far as I know. So
I think there's some special events on the same weekend as.
Oh, there is? Okay, cool. So after this weekend, then we'll be done with this format, because the new set does come out this weekend anyway, right? So yeah, any other decks or thoughts to cover with it? Any meta manipulation? All right,
I mean,
cool.
I want to play decks that lose to Spiritomb, so don't put Spiritomb in your deck, so I can play them.
Wait, why? Why is this?
Well, I want to play something with like Rotom and Lumineon and
Okay.
stuff, so I don't want to see a Spiritomb on my opponent's bench, so they should not play it.
Okay, everyone, write that down. Be ready for that. And we'll go talk about NAIC format. So if you have not gotten a head start on your testing for NAIC, don't worry, because Jake and I already recorded a bunch of tabletop stuff, and it's already on the Dead Drug Gaming channel. You can get a sneak peek and get a head start on your testing and just seeing how different decks work in the new format, how good Dragapult it is, etc. And we're also going to be recording more decks with some special guests over the next couple of weeks, and those will all go up on the channel as well. So check those out. But there's a bunch of decks to talk about. I think the biggest things to take away are like Giratina is still really, really strong, and that's probably a good place to start. Andrew, you played a lot of Giratina before. Why is it still doing so well in the new format?
Yeah, so this isn't really a deck I've been considering in the new format too much, but yeah, it has been getting some decent results. I do think like as before, like it doesn't really take any super bad matchups. I think you can probably handle Dragapult. Lugia is definitely going to be a little bit concerning, although the deck might be a little bit with it like now with playing since you can play like Temple for the legacy energy and stuff. I think maybe that matchup might be fine, to be honest. I haven't really played Giratina too much, but it like always it's probably going to be take a bunch of close matchups to everything, so
Yeah.
you can probably still play it if you want.
I think the Blood Moon Ursaluna is like just such a good card in Lost Box in general that having it in Tina is good. It's also like a really good answer to like an early Iron Hands. Like if you miss like a turn one Giratina, and then your opponent Iron Hands they'll be at 3 prizes. You can Blood Moon for 3 energies to knock them right back out. So put a little less pressure on your setup early. And then also it's like a free attack at the end of the game, which is sometimes Tina's problem is just that they have to loss zone too many energies. Right. Like you get a string of bad comfies and then you're out of energies and lose the game because of that. But Blood Moon Ursaluna attacks for free, so you really don't need those energies as long as you've got like gust effects open. You've got an attack that can take 2 prizes pretty easily.
Yeah, I think the deck's very good. Ursaluna is really strong in it, as Jake was saying. Like a lot of times with Tina, there's like between 160 and 280 damage that you want to hit, but like you don't want to lost impact or use your Requiem yet. So that's really nice. What's interesting though is the A-Spec decision is like really tough, I feel, with the deck because Prime Catcher obviously has been what's played a lot this format. It's going to be really good in any Lost Zone deck, but also Max Belt's a consideration so that you can one-shot a Dragapult a second time because a lot of Dragapult lists that aren't playing the Pidgeot, they don't have that like easy 2-price KO that Zard has sometimes, and you can't Iron Leaves to one-shot it. So Max Bell's good in that sense, but also if you are playing the Ursaluna, I don't hate Scoop Up Cyclone in it as well. There's some really weird boards you can make with it, and I do think overall Scoop Up Cyclone's a very underrated A-Spec in the format.
Yeah, Unfair Stamp is also not bad in Tina and just Lost Zone decks in general because you can get like you're basically playing Roxanne on turn 2 and Colress in the same time, so you can get a lot of like draw and consistency from that. So yeah, it's very hard to choose an A-Spec for Tina.
Yeah,
for sure.
I've seen literally like 3 different ones in the couple Tina lists I've clicked in the last minute, so it's definitely Max Belt seems really good too. Yeah, a lot of interesting decisions with it for sure.
Yeah, the A-Specs decisions get really interesting for a lot of decks, like in general. Like this format, it feels like a lot of decks kind of just have one A-Spec they play, right? Charizard's like the main deck that it kind of switches between things. But with all of the new A-Specs we're getting this next format, I feel like a lot of decks are going to have trouble choosing which one to play. And then that also means playing against them, you're going to have trouble figuring out what your opponent is playing. And that makes it way more interesting to try to play around it. And a lot of times game ones could be decided on trying to guess which A-Spec your opponent has. And if you guess wrong, could end up being pretty bad.
Yeah, I think the game designers have like finally done a good job for the first time with these like one of cards that you can only play one of. Like Radiance, it's always just been like Greninja or Charizard or your Radiant is terrible, but it's like still better than something else.
Hey, Serena's
like
going to be
Alakazam or
decent
Serena.
soon.
Yeah, like you're playing a terrible A-Spec or terrible Radiant that's only good in one matchup just because that matchup is so bad.
Yeah.
To try and fix it. But yeah, there's like so many good A-Specs in a lot of these decks. And most of them are not like the aggressive like Prime Catcher Like they've done a good job at balancing out sort of the aggressive ace specs versus consistency versus like comeback ones, which is cool.
Something I want to add is if you are playing like an Arven deck and you're playing like Max Belt or something, please, like, I know you think thinning your deck is good, but please don't Arven for your Max Belt if you don't need it. Like, you give your opponent so much free information by doing that. It's just like sometimes it just don't do it unless you need it. Like, it's not worth taking the one card out of your deck.
Yeah, very, very wise words. I want to talk about Arvin again when we get to Gardevoir in a little bit, but next deck I want to talk about, obviously one we've been talking about a lot. Everyone's been talking about a lot. We have 2 videos already on it on the Dead Drug Gaming channel. Is Dragapult. There's still a lot of questions with it in terms of like what to partner with it exactly, like what the perfect partner for it is. Jake has been feeling pretty good about Charizard in the list. Kind of advocating for that. Xatu seems to be like the most popular still right now. Some people are doing the Pidgeot stuff, and I feel like the most common comment I've seen on our Dragapult videos is that the deck's not even like actually tier 0 or that good. What are y'all's thoughts? Is it as scary as people think it should be, or as people think it is, or isn't, or what?
Well, I think one like pretty big development has happened in Japan, like in the past couple of weeks. Which they have actually been playing like there's a lot of unofficial tournaments which get like 150 players in them, and the Raging Bolt Ogerpon deck is like a lot more popular now, and it's got a really good Dragapult matchup. Like it's very very favored, just because you can one shot them and they can't one shot you back. So Zard in Dragapult helps that matchup a little bit. It also helps like Miraidon and things. But it kind of looks like the Raging Bolt deck is just like wiped out the meta share of Miraidon and taken it over. And I think it's a slightly better deck overall. And that has changed like quite a bit, I think, because like Charizard has a pretty good matchup against the Raging Bolt deck because of Radiant Charizard. And like Charizard's meta share has been going up again because of the Raging Bolt deck. So I think there's sort of like a triangle there that's forming between Dragapult, Raging Bolt, and Charizard, which is sort of preventing Dragapult from being like definitely the best deck in the format. So yeah, I think I don't think it'll become like as good as Charizard is now because of that Raging Bolt deck. Unless it turns out that Raging Bolt deck is just not good. I haven't put very many games into it, but
yeah, I haven't touched
it seems pretty good in theory.
I think Dragapult's like very good. I don't think it's going to be tier 0. I think I always thought it'd just be like tier 1-ish. Like it's very strong, but it is very beatable as well. There's a lot of options Control can do that can kind of farm it. The Guardy matchup, like very oddly enough, isn't that good for Pult. Like you look at the 2 decks and it's like, oh, Pult should farm this, and then it just doesn't a lot of the times, which is very odd. And you can sometimes just get overrun by like big basic decks. So it's very beatable. I don't think it was ever going to be like super tier 0, but
I think the thing people took a while to realize with Guardy is like you completely change the way you play the deck in the matchup. Like you're just attacking with Gardevoir EX every turn and Turo looping, and then so you're basically playing the Blissey EX deck, except you also have like Drifloon and other stuff for other matchups. So I think Gardevoir is just strictly better than Blissey. Because Blissey still can't beat Charizard anyway because they can one-shot you at the end. So the decks like do the same thing, but it's pretty cool how like Gardevoir has 2 completely different game plans depending on the matchup and the situation, and one of them is pretty good against Dragapult.
I think the big thing with Dragapult will be trying to figure out the best list and the best way to play. I still think we're probably a long ways from figuring out the best decks. I mean, some people will probably figure it out by NAIC, but I think we'll probably still be kind of all over the place around then. I kind of feel like it may be similar to what happened with Palkia when it came out last year. The lists were like not anywhere near where they ended up, right? With the 4 Battle Pass 4 Irida version that kind of ended up being the best. So I feel like with the first tournament with Dragapult, we might end up with a lot of decks the list not being amazing. I think by the time we figure out the best list, the deck will be extremely strong. But I don't know. I think if it will take a lot of work to try to come up with the best list and the best partners for Dragapult, and I'm still really not sure what the best way to play it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It is still very early. That the triangle Jake mentioned is really interesting. That's a deck we definitely want to talk about some more. But again, I don't know how much testing other people have done of it, of the Raging Bolt Ogre Pawn, and just yeah, big basics, really hard to deal with for Dragapult, especially when you're one-shotting the Dragapult's back. So pretty interesting stuff. Other deck I want to talk about was Control, something that I know, Piper, you've been testing for NAIC format. What are your thoughts on Control? Obviously, there are a lot of new Control cards coming in general, whether the Luxray may not be super popular, but there's still things like the Flute or whatever it's called in English. I think it's something
Mhm.
Flute and some other stuff too, right?
Yeah, I mean, Control is very good. It has a lot of options. Like a lot of new cards. I'd say the new Milotic's very interesting. Your opponent can't pick up their Pokemon, so like Mawile Lock becomes a lot more powerful with that. And like Pidgeot versions. Um, I guess like maybe Thwacky controls, someone might cook that. Like the only advantage it has over Pidgeot is that you can use it multiple times a turn, and it's like very powerful. Like searching your deck for 3 cards each turn seems very good, but obviously it's like I don't think it is better than something like Pidgeot. My only like issue with Control right now is we're already in such a diverse meta. It feels or like fairly decentralized. Besides like Zard and C-Pow, everything's like 5 to 9% of the meta. It feels, and it's like very difficult to build the list to beat all of those. Especially because a lot of the win cons like feel a bit shaky and fragile. And not only are we going from a decentralized meta, now we have like a new set added to that with quite a few new archetypes and like bringing back some old ones like Miraidon and stuff. And it makes it all very awkward. But I do think like with the right list, something like at UIC where Alessandro top forward, if you have like the right surprise cards, something like Noivern, that's like you could definitely do very well with the deck. It has a lot of potential.
I think next format Cloth EX is just a really really good card, and the fan card too. Like
Yeah.
that with Cloth with like Charizard and Dragapult have literally no they just
Yeah.
path against it every turn. So um, yeah, that's pretty good to beat those two decks. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see like Cloth and a fan like slapped into just random decks just to give you time against Dragapult and Charizard, which is pretty interesting. Like you could even like put it in Lugia and like just attack with the cloth or something. Could be pretty funny uh, just because of how good the card is in that matchup. But like, yeah, finding the fan would be hard or whatever. But yeah, I think cloth is a cool card, and that's pretty much my thoughts right now.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I found with the cloth and fan is that was originally my thought for pull as well, but in practice it hasn't been as strong as it seems in theory. I've tested it against Blocklax because Blocklax was having a lot of troubles with Pult, so we tested cloth and fan in Blocklax, and it was still just losing to Pult. It's really weird. But also my Pult list was playing like Turo and Switch, so it's like I had 2 switching out. Switching might be extra. I don't know. I do think Turo and Switch are both very good cards to have, though.
Yeah, I think you need like cloth is good to just buy time, but you need like
Yeah.
a strong win con at the end.
hmm That was one of the reasons we thought it wasn't super strong in Blocklax. But yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Next deck I wanted to mention because we did play a game of it on the Dead Draw Gaming channel was Dialga. Andrew, have you messed around with Dialga too much next format? Is the Beldum change having to go to like 70 HP Beldum's potentially too much of an issue? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought about it a little bit for the next format. It does seem pretty like the 72 buttons are so much worse than the
They
60
are.
HP one. So if you need to play that for Dragon Ball, that's definitely a pretty big problem. I think you might consider playing a split, but
Yeah.
overall that's not very good. And Lugia being one of the best decks is also not great for Dialga either. Lugia is like one of your toughest matchups as Dialga. And I think the Lugia list now are still probably going to be playing the Shichinos, and that's like a pretty big issue for Dialga in general as well. So I think those are going to be the like kind of problematic things. But I think like depending on how the meta evolves, it's possible that Dialga ends up having a spot, but I probably will not be bringing it to NAIC.
I think the Raging Bolt deck is also a little bit of an issue for a Dialga because 240 HP is an annoying number, and they can one shot on turn one. Um, yeah, if you start a Dialga, you're like down 2 prize cards already, and that's pretty rough.
I would say I don't know if you need to switch the Beldums because it's like Dragapult's not attacking that fast a lot of the time, and then they're having to put their 60 on Metangs each time just for like a Devo play in the late game, which is like okay. But the 70 HP is so much worse because I have like 2 retreats and the attack sucks. It's like I don't think it's worth it. But...
Apparently, there's a 70 with 1 retreat,
There is,
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But
I played against an
it does
opponent
not
at
search
like
out a card
Indy
for
with
the
the 2
deck, which
retreat,
is still up.
but
Yeah, it's much more. I've been playing with a 2-2 split, and it sucks every time I start the 70 HP. There's so many times where it's like, oh wow, if I just had the other one inactive, I would actually get to play the game, and then just brick instead. That's happened too many times. But someone was saying in one of our YouTube comments that one of the Japanese lists to deal with Dragapult was just running like 4 Turos, which does let you recycle Matangs and stuff, and does kind of clear the Dragapult, but also seems like a lot to add to the deck.
4 is crazy.
That's a lot, yeah. But I respect it.
Your deck is a quarter energies and you're adding 4 Turos? Like...
Yeah, so I think it's time to talk about Gardevoir then, which is... Jake gushed about it for like 5 minutes straight at the end of our last video of the tabletop videos. So why is it so awesome and cool in the next format?
I mean, they printed Mirage Step on an item card. It's pretty cool. It's not as good as Mirage Step, but it fixes a lot of the problems. And I really like that, like the Irida engine that the Japanese player played to the second place, because like towards the end of the game, like you've either already lost or you'll have no trouble finding your tool cards because you have like you'll have a full board of refinements. But early game, just being able to find Greninja or Manaphy and find a Poffin, it's like you get 1 extra basic, which is a lot of the time like a huge deal. So I thought that was pretty cool. But the Monkey Dory's like such a cool card as well. Like it makes Gardevoir EX a really good attacker because Gardevoir EX basically hits 220 now. And even if you're short on knockouts, you can like knock it out later with the Monkey Dory, which is actually like a beneficial against Iron Hand sometimes because you can hit them for 220 and then Monkey Dory disables their like baton card, so they don't get to keep the energies in play. So you can plan like double knockouts pretty easily, and that's pretty cool. Screamtail is also just really good against Lugia, which is like a good benefit for the deck. You can knock out Archeops super easily. And yeah, so as long as the Charizard matchup isn't terrible, then you can find a way to beat that consistently. It's pretty good. You can also hit 330 more easily now with the Monkey Dory. You can get on odd numbers on the Drifloon with the 30 damage if you want to put it elsewhere, or you just do use the 3 damage to put you from 300 to 330 when you hit with Drifloon. So you don't have to play the Hero's Cape or the Mantle, whatever it's called, Luxurious Cape.
Yeah, the Monkey Dory Drifloon map is really good because you can put yourself on odd and then set up the second one so that you do 330 with the first Drifloon, and then on like a second 330 HP Pokemon or whatever, you only need to do 300 on it, which is very useful. Or you can set up the like 4 prize turns and KOs so that you're getting Iona to 6 or something. Although that is like more susceptible to Turos and Scuba Cyclones, especially like with Pult, where Scuba Cyclone's fairly common. I'm not sold on the Aroma A-Spec though with Guardy. Like TM Evo sucks, but I don't know. Unfair Stamp is so good. Like Countercatcher Unfair Stamp Screamtail just is so broken. It's like I don't know. And you still get to play supporter after all that. Like you can Turo your Guardy or something. I don't know. I do like the Iridas, but I'm still not sure on the correct A spec for Guardy. It has a lot of options.
I think like if Guardy had like a really strong supporter option that you'd want to play, like in addition to Countercatcher Stamp and then some great supporter, it would be really good. But there isn't really that piece, so it doesn't hurt that much to just be using Iono Countercatcher. Like maybe if you play like an Eerie or something, that could be even worse, like even more powerful. But Turo is pretty good to Turo your Guardy. But if you're gonna Unfair Stamp Countercatcher, you're probably hoping that your opponent just doesn't have a way out of it, so you don't really care that your Gardevoir EX is in play most of the time. I think like the consistency of the Hyper Aroma is just so good from the couple games I've played that I really don't want to cut it. I also think Unfair Stamp, when it got released in Japan, was really, really broken. Like it was S tier A spec, but Tatsugiri index is makes it so much less powerful. Because if you have like Tatsugiri plus Mew EX in play, you're seeing like the top 9 to 12 cards of your deck, basically. Like draw 2 from Unfair Stamp, 1 from top deck, potentially 3 more if you can play those with the Mew EX, and then 6 more with Tatsugiri to find a research or something. So it's not sticking like the aggressive decks early game anymore. But yeah, it's still a pretty powerful card. And like Shuffle Draw 5 is not terrible either, just to get more stuff going.
Yeah, I like Unfair Stamp in the early game a lot because like Ionoing to 5 or 4 sometimes just doesn't feel great. And one of the things is like Guardy kind of struggles to buy back turns, unlike what it used to do. I haven't tested it as much in the next format, but in this format at least. So like if you can, before your opponent is like able to prioritize setting up Tatsugiri and stuff because they're like trying to put pressure on you early, the Unfair Stamp when they're like going to 5 or 4 has felt very good. And it is like pseudo consistency in that it is a Shuffle Draw 5, and you can still use a supporter from there to like find pieces and whatnot.
Yeah, it definitely helps out in those hands where you've got like a 1 or 2 card hand and like refinements in play. You really don't want to refinement whatever your hand. It's just getting the like 5 cards that you can just throw away is kind of nice too. Yeah, there's benefits to both. Yeah, if Unfair Stamp only did disruption, I don't think I would ever consider it. But because you also get the little bit of consistency boost, it's definitely worth considering.
For sure. My
I was
my
gonna
other issue
say,
with the
yeah.
oh, sorry.
You can
Oh,
Okay.
the other issue with Hyper Aroma is if you prize it, like it feels pretty bad. Whereas with 2 Evo, at least you have the second one. I don't know. It's like prizing Mirage Step. It just sucked, but it's not like prizing Mirage Step because you also have level ball and stuff. But
My main takeaway from playing against Gardevoir is that the Monkey Dory like is so much better than it seems. Even like because moving, you can move the 30 in one turn, but over multiple turns, or even with like a Turo, you can sometimes like do so much more damage to your opponent's board than like seems realistic. It kind of feels like playing against Urshifu and Teleon almost, where like they could get way more damage into play in like one turn than it seemed like they should be able to. So like at the end of games, like sometimes you Guardy has their whole deck in their hand, right? Their opponent's like way ahead, but you can pull off these like crazy like Monkey Dory, Turo, Monkey Dory plays if you can get back the Dark Energy or if you have 2 of them to do just so much damage around your opponent's board and take so many prizes in one turn that like it just doesn't seem like would be realistic for them to do.
Yeah, I think also like a lot of decks sort of like fizzle out towards the end of the game and they just can't one shot a Gardevoir EX, so you can get back turns just by attacking with Gardevoir then as well. Yeah, like Gardevoir and Turo, like just being able to loop Gardevoirs gives you like so much potential to like put on pressure to the opponent. If you're Ionoing them, like is it yeah, if you're Turoing like early game, you can get like a bigger lead, and then Iono at the end of the game and get like even more lead just by putting them to low hands and killing their engines with Screamtail, or just counter catcher KO stuff. It like there's a lot of potential to buy back turns and be really annoying with how you take your prize cards.
Yeah, Gardevoir seems like very strong deck next format. Big turnaround from a deck that Piper thought was pretty bad into one that's everyone seems to be in agreement that's really strong next format. So we'll be excited to see how that all turns out. The last major deck I wanted to talk about was Lugia. I know Andrew, a big Lugia fan, also has been testing it a lot. It's a deck that I feel like kind of similarly where people haven't figured out exactly like what the right partners to put in it are. Like the main ones are obviously everyone's throwing in the Ursaluna. People in Japan are like 50-50 on the Ogre Pawn. And that Legacy Energy does kind of let you throw in basically like so many different potential options for attackers. So what are your thoughts on Lugia next format, Andrew?
Yeah, I definitely think Lugia is going to see a resurgent X format, as most people probably also agree with. The new supporter Carmine, I think, is pretty good to have access to in the deck. I'm not playing 4 of them. I'm just playing the 1, but a lot of times you end up with a turn 1 hand that's just completely unplayable. You can Luminion for Carmine and have a chance to play the game at least, which is pretty good. Definitely with also the return with 2 Luminion, probably with the Legacy Energy, that becomes a much better strategy as well. But the deck is very good. It has a lot of close matchups. I feel like against pretty much anything, you have a chance if you can get the early setup, potentially go into the Iron Hands or the Water Ogre Pawn, which I think is interesting. I'm not 100% sold on that being in the deck yet, but it's not the worst card ever. I do think people are going to have to be playing those Temple of Sinnohs and Enhanced Hammers to eventually deal with the deck. I think the Roseanne's backup card's really interesting. If people are playing Enhanced Hammer, I think that could be a really good option to get back the card, but It's not very good against Temple of Sinnoh because you also would need to find a stadium bump with it. And if you're using your supporter to get back Legacy Energy, you probably are not finding a stadium bump. So I think that card depends a lot on if people are going with the early Enhanced Hammers to try to slow down like an early Iron Hands, or if they're just playing the Temple of Sinnohs. Would like more dictate how good Roseanne's backup is. But overall, I feel like the deck is definitely going to be a strong contender this format.
Are there any matchups that you're worried about? Like, how are we worried about like the Raging Bolt Ogerpon stuff? We kind of talked about a lot of the other ones, but yeah, it does seem like it's pretty even into a lot of other things right now.
I've not played against that deck. The matchup doesn't seem that difficult. I don't know. I haven't tested against it, but Sinnoh seems pretty annoying for them to deal with.
Yeah.
I know the Murata matchup is not as bad as I thought it would be. That matchup's like actually fine if you can get set up. The big issue is if they just run you off the board before you get the Archeops. So.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah, it seems like a much stronger options next format, and also Carmine being a nice consistency bump, something that the deck kind of needs after losing the consistency it had in previous formats when we had rotation hit. I just wanted to touch briefly on some more niche deck stuff. We already talked about Raging Bolt Ogerpon stuff. I haven't personally tested it at all, but it does seem very strong, very good. And if it does have that triangle effect, then potentially some other decks that were kind of being gatekept by Dragapult can potentially make more headway or kind of find right times in the meta to poke back in and do some stuff. Gouging Fire is a deck that I wanted to mention briefly because it did get top 16 at Sapporo. It does seem totally fine, especially if there's less Dragapult in general. I haven't actually thoroughly tested the Dragapult matchup. It just sounds bad if they are playing damage modifier stuff especially. But Gouging Fire seems like it could be pretty solid into next format. It just kind of depends on how the rest of the meta shakes out. Just being able to do 260 with that thing seems really good if everyone's also trying like big basic stuff to deal with Dragapult. So definitely interested in that. Turbo Hands is another kind of weird one where it's scary because of things like Blood Moon or Saluna, but if things just kind of line up for it, it could make sense to be played, especially because you have Tatsugiri to help with some of the late game Iono hand disruption stuff. But any thoughts on any other more kind of niche decks for next format or any of those decks?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think Gouging Fire is just like a worse Raging Bolt Ogerpon. As far as I can tell right now, maybe there's something better about it for some reason that I can't tell, but I don't really see a reason to play that deck when the Raging Bolt deck is like the same thing but hits for infinite damage instead of just 260.
Yeah, I actually think Gouging Fire is not too bad. It might just be worse than the Raging Bolt. I haven't like seen the Raging Bolt or tested it enough to like say for sure, but Gouging Fire, you get some really interesting plays where you can Magma Base in 20 to your Gouging Fire, and then some lists are playing Monkey Dory, so you can move the 20, so you A, heal your Gouging Fire, and B, now you're hitting 280.
Yeah.
Max Belt takes you to 330, that's killing Pult and Zard. Like, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. But yeah, it might just be worse than the Raging Bolt.
I guess if you're playing like Dark Energies, you could play Roaring Moon in there too or something. Like that,
Yeah.
that could be a bit interesting.
Yeah. Also, like, Radiant Heatran's a really good attacker, like, oddly enough, so, like, being able to base into it sometimes is nice. I don't know if they're playing the Radiant Heatran, though, but it does seem, I don't know, it's a very interesting attacker.
Any other decks y'all want to mention? Maybe more under the radar or like low key kind of stuff.
I think Lost Box is very good. You're basically able to play Radiant Charizard and Radiant Greninja in the same Lost Box list, which is like what every Sablezard player has ever wanted, because they play their deck and it's inconsistent, like so inconsistent, and Radiant Greninja solves most of that.
Yeah.
But now you have Ursaluna, which can deal with Iron Hands very efficiently. You don't have to go like Frenzy Gouging or Town Store for Defiance Band and Calamity Storm or whatever Hoopa EX's attack is called.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't play that card. It's bad. But yeah.
Yeah, I really like Ursaluna just being a much cleaner hands answer. You don't need to worry about like taking a different type of energy like you would with like the Groudon list or playing something like Hoopa or whatever. And just a really strong general purpose card. Good into the Raging Bolt Ogerpon surely too.
Yep.
To one shot those guys. So yeah, definitely seems like very strong still going into next format along with Giratina. And I think that's pretty much it to talk about for NAIC. We're going to cover NAIC much more in depth next podcast. It'll be the week of NAIC. So we'll have a lot more to talk about then, and there will also actually have the cards released on live, and the set will actually be officially released. So more people will be testing it, and we'll have more tournaments, online tournament results to talk about with it as well.
We also get the Japan National Championships happens the week before NAIC.
That is huge. Yeah, that's awesome. I forgot about that. So we'll have a lot to talk about then for our next format and next podcast. So shout outs for everyone here. Piper, where can people follow you on Twitter? Are any articles coming up, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think I'm writing an article on the NAIC format this week. My Twitter is just my name, Piper Lepine. And yeah, I coach on Metafy too, so you can check that out. I think there's a link in my Twitter bio.
Perfect. Jake.
Yeah, you can find me at Jake K. Gearhart on Twitter. And I am actually going to start doing Metafy coaching soon as well. But a little bit different. I really like those group sessions. So I'm going to do like group sessions on like teaching deck building concepts and stuff like that. I think it'll be fun. I have a pretty cool idea for how I want to do it. So stay tuned for info on that. Very, very unique. Well, hopefully people will like it.
All right, Jake trying to shake up the game. I like it. Andrew, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can go follow me on Twitter at PokeHawkeye, and I also published an article on Cutter Tap about Dialga last week, so be sure to check that out if you're interested as well.
Yeah, definitely check it out, especially if you're thinking about playing it for LA or want to know how to play against it or just be more prepared for it. Definitely go check that out. CutterTap.com. Thank you to them for sponsoring Dead Draw Gaming. We're going to be recording a brief little bonus episode for the Patreon, so if you want to support the podcast and Dead Draw Gaming, check out the Patreon. You can also get some bonus content from this podcast and past podcasts. We'd really appreciate it. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you are watching it here on YouTube, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and we will see you all on the next episode. Take care.